This is the fifth in a series of videos that I've produced that I call Things That I Do. The purpose of the Things That I Do series is to do one of two things. Either to show you things that I do that is perhaps different than you see other people doing, or it is in response to questions that I have received from my viewers. This video deals with both of those things because I guarantee you that it is different from the norm. I don't think you've ever seen anyone else fish with a fishing reel the way I fish with this old black reel. And I have also received question after question about the old reel. People want to know, where did I get it? Why do I use it? What kind of reel is it? Question after question. But there's one question that no one has asked that is surprising to me. Either no one has noticed, or at least no one has ever asked, why the old black reel doesn't have a bail on it. And the reason is because I cut it off. One thing I need to clarify is that I do use other reels besides the old black reel. And by the way, the old black reels are Mitchell 308s and 408s, made back in the 60s and 70s and even into the 80s. So I do use newer style reels, but as this picture indicates, most of the time when I use them, I cut the bails off of them too. This is a small reel that I put on a 3-foot rod when I'm wading down small creeks. This larger spinning reel is one that I use to fish planer boards off of the bank, something that will also be the subject of another Things I Do video. Another thing I need to clarify is that I don't cut the bails off of all of my reels. If I am casting and retrieving a lure, I cut the bails off of it. But if I'm using the reel in a stationary position, such as in a rod holder or a forked stick for catfish or something like that, I leave the bail on it. This is a reel I put on a 12-foot rod. It's a long cast reel. I can cast fantastic distances with it. The reason I leave the bail on it is that sometimes I combine it also with the planer board technique that I use. I have 2 or 3 rod and reel setups like this that I use for channel cat or other types of fish on the rare occasion when I'm bait fishing. Of course, when you fish that way, you set the rod in a rod holder in an unattended manner, and so it's better to have a bail on them. These are my spider rigging rods and reels, and of course you always use the bails on them. So you can see that I don't always fish without a bail, but I will say that at least 90% of the time I do. If you would check out all the rods and reels in my den, you would probably find that 75% of them are those old black reels, and probably 80% of those have the bails cut off of them. By the way, I'm not the only one that uses these spinning rods with the bails cut off of them. Most of the people that I fish with, this is the way they fish. This is my nephew and my brother on a recent crappie fishing trip, and this is a video out of that trip, and as we zoom in, you will see that they fish the same way I do. This is my wife fishing for crappie, and as you can see, her reel does not have a bail on it. About a year ago, I bought her a new reel for her birthday because it was red, and she loves the color red. But when we got out in the boat and started fishing, I handed her her birthday present, and she handed it back to me, and I said, "Well, what's wrong?" And she said, "I can't fish with this." And I said, "Why?" And she said, "It's got a stupid bail on it." Now I'm going to show you some videos of me casting a bailless reel. I want you to notice that the right hand does all the work. The left hand only turns the crank. This is much more efficient. You don't have to open the bail, or you don't have to close the bail. Not only does this save a lot of time, but it keeps you in contact with the fish and with the line at all times. As I was making this video, I had a difficult time finding video clips where I was using my hands in the process of casting and retrieving my reel. But I finally found a couple of clips. In this particular one, we have several casts in succession. So watch closely and get an idea of what happens with the right hand and the left hand in the process of fishing in this manner. For me, there is no question that this is the best way for me to fish with an open-faced spinning reel. What we will do next is assume that you might want to try this and show you how we think you ought to go about it if you do want to try it. The first thing you have to do is find a reel that fits your hand perfectly. Notice in this picture that my finger is falling straight down in a natural position and the line hits at the first joint of the finger. This is a must. Otherwise, what is a very comfortable way to fish might become a very uncomfortable way to fish. Notice in this picture as I move my finger how the bend and the line come together in a perfect manner. For this reel, however, it is not a perfect fit. My finger doesn't drop straight down. I have to extend my finger to pick up the line. You do not want this. The reel must fit your hand perfectly. One of the many reasons why I still choose to use these old Mitchell reels is that they fit my hand perfectly. Notice how well the line fits in to the first bend of my finger. After you find a reel that fits your hand, the next thing that you have to do is to remove the bail from the reel. I start by removing the screw from the fulcrum end of the bail first. After the fulcrum screw has been removed, place the bail in a vise and be sure that it is secure so that it will not move while you're actually cutting the bail off. I've been cutting bails off of spinning reels now for over 60 years, and I haven't found any way that works better than to use a Dremel tool. Once the bail has been removed, be sure to take all of the burrs off that was caused during the removal process. I use a combination of the Dremel tool and some emery paper to deburr the bail. Take more time with yours than I'm taking in this demonstration. Some of the newer style reels actually have the spring or cam that operates the bail located on the fulcrum end. Believe it or not, this actually makes it easier. All you have to do is cut the wire on the bail. Another thing that you need to consider, besides the position of your finger relative to the line roller, is the anti-reverse lever on the reel. All of the reels can be turned backwards or not turned backwards. They call it the anti-reverse lever. It helps a lot if the anti-reverse lever is in such a position that when you are in casting position, you can make a visual check to see whether it is on or off, because that's very important to this technique of fishing. The reason is that when your finger pulls up on the line to lift it off the roller has to move down and out of the way. This typically happens automatically. If it doesn't, just a little motion forward on the handle moves it back. If the anti-reverse lever is in the on position, it will not fall back out of the way so that you can cast. A lot of the newer reels have the anti-reverse lever on the bottom where you can't see them while you're fishing. Now this is a minor thing, particularly for someone who does it all the time as I do, but it's just handy. And it's also one of the features that I like on the old Mitchell 308 and 408 reels. Now that we have our reel selected and our bail is cut off, we're ready to go. So let's learn how to fish using the bailless system. The first thing you do is tie some kind of a weight on the end of your line. Hook your finger on the line, lift your finger off the roller and catch the lure before it hits the ground with your finger. Reel it back up, hook it with your finger, drop it, catch it, reel it back up. Keep repeating that process until you get good at it. It will only take a few minutes. Next, I want you to make a series of underhand casts, and the object of this is to teach you how to catch the line on your finger just before it hits the ground or the water or wherever it is you're casting. Cast it out. Try to catch the line just before it hits the ground. It's important that you hook your finger on the line while the lure or weight is moving out. After you have mastered these two techniques, you're ready to learn how to make overhand casts. Actually, the technique is the same. The lure is simply moving faster, and you're casting overhanded rather than underhanded. I'm zooming in a little closer so that you can see better how the finger hooks on the line, how the right hand works independent of the left hand, and how you must catch the lure just before it hits the water or the ground, and then of course reel it back in and repeat that process over and over and over. After you've learned how to do this well, you can then learn how to take your right finger and let the line brush it on the way out, and you can feather the lure to almost a complete stop and hardly make a splash when you hit the water. Hopefully I have explained the basics of how to fish with a bailless open-faced spinning reel. And that was one of my reasons for making this video. The second reason was to answer questions that many viewers have asked about this old spinning reel that I still use, made in the 70s and 80s. And that is why I like it, why I use it, and so forth. So let's get right into it. Unlike today's reels, these old reels came with 3 different spools when you purchased them. They had a shallow spool. I used 2, 3, and 4 pound test line on it. They had a medium depth spool, which I use almost exclusively 6 pound test line on. And then they had the deep spool. I use exclusively 8 pound test line on this spool. You also got an arbor that can be placed in the 6 pound test spool, or I call it a 6 pound test spool, to convert it to 2 or 4 pound test line. I'm not sure I can even explain to you what a tremendous advantage it is to have these spools. The spools that you see sitting on the shelf are organized into 5 different groups. The ones on the left are 2 pound test. The ones adjacent to them are 3 pound test spools. The center ones are 4 pound test. Moving to the right, I have 6 pound test line. And finally, my 8 pound test line spools. I have over 100 of these spools. This is just a few of them. These are the ones that are needing to be refilled. One of the things I like about the spools is they are small, and I have them stored every place. All of my tackle boxes have them, my fishing vests. I have 9 boats. There are spools in each one of those. I have them in drawers. It's so convenient to have spools everywhere with different pound test line, so that if you're fishing for another species, you want to change the size of your line or the pound test of your line, you just pull one spool out and put the other one in. My channel is a multi-species channel. That means I fish for almost everything. And when I'm fishing, for example, in a kayak or a canoe, or if I'm wading in the river, I can only take 1 or sometimes 2 rods with me. So if I want to change tactics and fish for something that requires a heavier line or a lighter line, all I have to do is change spools. Another thing I like about this little reel is the ease with which you can snap spools in and out. Changing one spool to another spool is so easy. It's also easy to adjust the drag, especially when you don't have a bail in the way, and we'll talk more about that drag later. The line keeper on this little spool is something that is so handy. You don't have to try to force the line under a silly thumb pad. You give it a turn, pull it through the slot, and you're done. I love the drag system on these old reels. So let's disassemble this one, and I'm going to show you how I alter it. You will see that there is a spring in the bottom of the drag that makes a clicking sound. I don't like this clicking sound, so I'm going to take it out. The reason I removed the clicker spring was that it takes a small amount of drag to operate it. To further reduce the drag or the friction, I'm going to apply silicone spray to the upper and lower surfaces that the drag spring functions against. When finished, I have one of the smoothest drags that you'll ever find in a spinning reel. What I do is use a scribe, and I scribe in the number representing the pound test of the line. The first one was 3 pound test, This one, as you can see, is 4-pound test, and this one is 8-pound test. I have so many of these spools that if I don't mark them, I get them mixed up. I've noticed over the years that a lot of people that I fish with don't know how to set the drag on their spinning rod. Setting a drag is a matter of controlling friction, and the guides on your rod have friction. So what I do is hook my lure on something or have somebody hold it for me. In this case, I've got my lure hooked in an old stump I'm getting ready to remove, and I hold the rod in the position that I'm planning to fight the fish, and I simulate the motion of fighting a fish, and I adjust the drag the way I want it. Always set the drag on the loose side. You can always tighten it. Now that we've seen the drag on my old reel, let's compare that drag to the drags on the newer type reels. Notice the difference in the size and shape of the two spools. The reel on the right has a lot of wasted space. There's a cover or a housing there that extends the spool out. It has no function at all, but it makes the spool so large that you can't carry a lot of spools with you like you can with the old reel that I use. Also notice as we disassemble this reel that it's a lot more time consuming to change the spool and adjust the drag. Now that I'm ready to put the spool back on, I've got to try to align a square hole up, and that's kind of difficult. When I finally get the spool on the shaft, I have to take the end cap off of the other spool and transfer it to the new one. And then I have to screw it down this long screw until it makes contact with the drag. And once I get it tightened down, I have to adjust my drag. Remember, on the old reel, you didn't have to change the drag when you changed the spool. And by the way, here's that thumb pad that they use for a line keeper that I don't like at all. Now I want you to bear with me for a minute. I want to tell you how I discovered this method of fishing that I call bailless fishing. And I'm also going to reveal to you one other reason why I am so sold on this method of fishing. Back in the mid-60s, I drove up to Bagnell Dam to do some tail race fishing, hoping to catch some crappie. When I arrived there, I walked down the bank and walked down to the water's edge to begin fishing, and I noticed an old gentleman fishing just a few yards upstream from me. And so I started fishing, and I couldn't help but notice that he was catching one crappie after another. I was catching a few crappie, but nothing like he was catching. And this went on for about 30 minutes. I couldn't stand it. I walked up the bank and I said to the old gentleman, "Sir, I'm not very smart, but I'm smart enough to know that you know something I don't know about catching crappie." And the old gentleman looked at me and smiled, and he said, "Son, I'm going to show you something that will change the way you fish for the rest of your life." He handed me his rod and he said, "Fish with this rod." And when I started to fish with it, it had no bail on it, and I had no idea what to do with it. So he gave me a few minutes instruction, and then he went up and got another rod just like it, and we stood there together and fished for quite a while, but he was still catching more fish than I caught. He said, "Let me show you one other thing." And he showed me a way of catching fish that to me is one of the most important reasons to use a bailless fishing reel. The old man called it fingering the line. He turned the handle on the reel, and as he did so, he dropped his forefinger down, and every revolution of the spool, the line flipped off of his finger and made the line twitch. I started doing that, and he and I caught crappie after crappie after crappie. And I walked up that bank, went back home, cut the bail off my spinning reel, and I haven't used one since to fish for crappie. And let me hasten to tell you that you cannot use the old man's fingering technique with a bail on your reel. In this video clip, I want you to watch my forefinger. Don't pay any attention to anything else. Watch the line as it hits my forefinger, and then see what happens to the line. Watch the line twitching. On this particular day, my brother and I used this technique for trout fishing. We caught 40 trout, while 5 or 6 other people there, not using this technique, not even knowing about it, caught practically nothing. Once again, watch the forefinger. The farther you extend your finger down, the more violent the line twitches. If you're a person that likes to use jerk baits, for example, instead of jerking the rod violently as most people do, just extend your finger down and you will be amazed at what the old man's fingering technique will do to a jerk bait. Well, that's it. I hope I've answered a lot of questions about the old black reel and why I use it. I hope I've convinced you that I'm really serious about using a bailless reel. I want to kind of review now some of the things that I've said. If you use a bailless reel, it eliminates having to use the left hand in the casting process. You don't have to open the bail, or you don't have to close it. It keeps you in contact with the fish, because when you catch the line on your finger, you're in contact with a fish that happens to strike rather quickly before you could get your bail closed. Not having a bail on your reel lets you get your fingers to the spool and lets you finger your line. By fingering your line, you can achieve a lot of actions on your lure, and also you can keep the line tighter on your spool, which increases your casting distance. Having the line tighter on the spool also helps eliminate what we call wind knots, because most wind knots are not caused by wind at all. It's caused by a bail slapping the line on a slack line. I used to have a job repairing reels in a tackle shop, and I can tell you from experience that most of the repairs I made on open face spinning reels were caused by malfunctioning bails. If you don't have a bail on your reel, it can't malfunction. Finally, it only takes a couple of seconds to open and close a bail, but when you make about 1,000 casts in a day, it can sure make a difference. Well, thanks for watching, and remember that our Things I Do series are not intended to imply that we do anything any better than anybody else. But when you've fished for 70 years, about 100 times a year, you learn a few things along the way.